All right, let's dive right into political psychology. We're going to break down the core concepts you absolutely need to know to ace your exam. The whole field really boils down to this one huge question. We see it all the time, right? Really smart, capable people in positions of power making choices that just seem, well, completely irrational in hindsight. So let's get into exactly why that happens. So, to really get to the heart of political decisions, we have to start with how we form our political identities in the first place. And that conversation almost always kicks off with this really powerful psychological process called othering. Now, for your exam, remember this. Othering isn't just about noticing differences. It's an active process of defining who we are by creating a them. And the crucial part is that it often puts them on a lower social rung, as somehow inferior. A really clear, modern example of this is the difference we saw in European border policies for Ukrainian refugees compared to Syrian refugees. This shows how that idea of familiar versus other isn't just a theory, it has massive real-world consequences. So this idea of identity leads us straight into a classic debate in political science. Do the leaders themselves shape history, or are they just products of the historical moment they're in? On one side, you've got the agency argument. This says that a leader's personality and choices are everything. I mean, think about the huge foreign policy shift from Obama to Trump. That's a perfect example. But then on the other side, you've got the structure argument, which says that actually leaders are pretty boxed in by political systems, public opinion, and what's happening on the world stage. So whether the power is with the leader or the system, why do their decisions still go so terribly wrong sometimes? Well, the answer usually isn't about intelligence. It's about these predictable flaws, these cognitive traps that are just baked into how we think. And it turns out, most decision-making failures can be traced back to a breakdown in one of these three stages. Let's look at the specific cognitive traps that mess things up at each step. Groupthink. You've probably heard of this one. It's what happens when the social pressure to agree becomes so strong that it just squashes any realistic look at other options. It's not that people are forced to be quiet, it's that everyone just wants to get along. We definitely saw signs of this during some of the early COVID-19 responses. There was this urgent need for a unified plan, which led some governments to jump into these really strict lockdowns without fully debating all the other social and economic impacts. That kind of tunnel vision is a classic symptom of groupthink. Okay, next up is framing. This one is so subtle, but it is incredibly powerful. The basic idea is that how you present a problem can totally change the solution people choose, even if the facts underneath are exactly the same. The classic example, and you really need to know this one for the exam, is the Asian disease problem. So if you frame a scenario as saving 200 lives, people almost always pick the safe, guaranteed option. But if you frame the exact same outcome as letting 400 people die, suddenly people are way more willing to gamble on a risky option. Same numbers, same choice, but a different frame leads to a totally different decision. All right, our next trap is escalation of commitment. This is basically our inability to cut our losses. You might have heard of it as the sunk cost fallacy. It's that feeling of, well, we've already invested so much, we can't stop now, even when it's obvious things are failing. And we see this in politics constantly. A government will launch some big, flashy policy, and it starts to go south. But admitting defeat looks bad, right? So instead, they double down, pouring more time and money into it, which just makes the eventual failure even bigger. And finally, confirmation bias. Honestly, we're all guilty of this one. It's our brain's natural tendency to look for information that proves we're right, while conveniently ignoring any evidence that suggests we might be wrong. In politics, this is super dangerous, because it leads to leaders surrounding themselves with yes men and dismissing critical intelligence. Okay, so that's a whole lot of ways for our thinking to go wrong. It's a bit depressing, right? So how do we actually make better decisions? Well, political psychologists point to one main tool: reflexivity. So what is reflexivity? Put simply, it's the practice of thinking about your own thinking. It means hitting the pause button during a decision and asking questions like, wait, why do I actually believe this? What biases might be messing with my judgment right now? Are we really looking at all the angles here? And this is how it actually works. You can build reflexivity right into the system. For example, you can fight groupthink by formally appointing a devil's advocate, someone whose job it is to argue against the popular opinion. You can prevent that escalation of commitment by making people accountable for the decision-making process, not just the final outcome. That makes it way easier to change course when things aren't working. Now, if you want to really master these concepts and make sure you're ready for your exam, you can find the full summary and a bunch of practice tests over at greatguru.nl. So let's do a super quick recap of the key takeaways for your exam. First, political identity is often shaped by othering, creating an us versus them. Second, the structure versus agency debate asks who really holds the power. Third, remember those cognitive traps like groupthink, framing, and escalation that lead to bad decisions. And finally, reflexivity is the essential tool we have to fight back against those biases. And that's our deep dive on these core concepts. I'll just leave you with this question. As you're watching the news or scrolling through social media, which of these cognitive traps do you see playing out in the world around you?